Hey there, kia ora. Welcome to this week's Omnibus. I'm actually in the process at the moment of setting up the studio for the live stream that we're doing with Jan Tanetti tonight, Saturday night. It's on Saturday night. If you're watching this on Sunday, clearly missed the live stream. But it has been a really fascinating week. Sorry, got to get the right color grading here. It's been a really fascinating week with a whole bunch of distractions from the government. Pay equity still being very clearly an issue, a whole bunch of other really random bullshit going on out there. It's been absolutely crazy. So yeah, check out this week's Omnibus and see what's in there. Don't forget, hit that like button, share, subscribe. Feel free to become a paid member as well. I've got some really exciting stuff coming up for paid members actually. You guys are going to be the first to see the documentary series that I'm working on around local government. I was up till 2 o'clock this morning writing the script on the astroturfing groups and how Voices for Freedom have infiltrated themselves into the residents and ratepayer associations across almost all of the country. It's kind of scary, but I'm putting it all together, doing some interviews. It's like a proper growing-up documentary, so stay tuned. That'll actually be out probably first week of July when I'm not in the country to get the death threats that come with it. Anyway, we'll worry about that later. In the meantime, check out this week's Omnibus. And yeah, as I said, like, share, subscribe, hide under the couch and panic. It's all good options. Hello there, kia ora. The National Party have gone into crisis PR mode this week after last week's surprising changes to the Pay Equity Act and the very quick backlash to that announcement. Not that they're going to admit it, but what we've seen from the party over the past few days has been textbook crisis comms, and it comes from National because, well, they recognise that this looks like an ACT party change that's going to damage them for allowing it to go ahead, like the Treaty Principles Bill or the Regulatory Standards Bill. But they can't say it's damaging because that's not how supportive coalition partners work together when the big partner is beholden to the brash, unpopular, and disingenuous smaller partner to retain power. Doesn't stop the smaller partner going out and going, yeah, nah, that's not what we're doing. But, the big party's trying to look respectable here. So how do we know that this is crisis comms then? Well, because it's literally Crisis Comms 101 as laid out by Google. First step here is to identify the risk that's at hand. In the House, opposition MPs oppose things, so it's not always easy to get a sense of how something's been received by the public, especially when the bill in question was landed as a surprise and didn't go through the select committee process or any kind of public consultation. So, after assessing the news responses, seeing how the public reacted and how the media framed the issue, they assessed the risk was pretty damn high because media outlets that platform government talking points and frame issues through these specific points did not give them great headlines. And those outlets' top fans and regular commentators, they didn't approve of the changes, even when it was framed about financial savings, the most National Party thing that the National Party can do. The next step, though, in crisis comms is to identify the key messaging that you want to put out there to get things under control. This is done by looking at the overarching messaging that's out there and trying to find a way to spin it that the messaging is wrong, which in this case was to argue that equal pay was still in place and that equal pay laws haven't changed. Equal pay is when two people do the same job, and the law stops an organization from offering a man more money than a woman for that particular job. Pay equity, which is what this was about, is when you look at what that role entails, finding comparable roles and elements within those roles and seeing if one dominated by men are paid more than the ones dominated by women, like customer service roles in banking, which are dominated by men, and customer service roles in libraries, which are dominated by women. Which is why it's taken years for the 33 cases that the government cancelled to go through this process, while they collect mountains of data and collate it all to ensure that they've reached what was the threshold to be able to move through the processes before they made that threshold harder to reach under this new law. After working out what the messaging is, then the question is, how are you going to deliver it? What channels do you put it out on? Now, you may have noticed over the weekend there was a bit of a void there of media appearances by members of the coalition while they kind of went to ground. They focused on a social media first strategy with posts in their messaging To be honest, that messaging was awful, but it was shared in local community pages like this one and by a variety of MPs who had been probably identified as being more likely to have offended women in some way, like Women's Affairs Minister Nicola Grigg, or Northcote's Dan Bidwar, who recently had to defend defunding a local women's organisation on the North Shore. Then the plan was to distract and detract. Almost every National MP focused on messaging around repeating the failed car-crushing boy racer laws over the weekend that failed last time that they were used, but is really popular with their older Conservative base of voters, which gave the crisis team time to plan for Monday comms. Because Monday is when the Prime Minister does his morning media rounds and his post-cabinet press conference. To make sure the focus wasn't on the Prime Minister over the issue, Nicola Willis had an op-ed released, framing the issue around vilifying a reporter who called her the C-word in an article responding to the changes, which is an understandable response since that's a pretty extreme and polarising descriptor. On breakfast, the Prime Minister actually wasn't pushed too hard on this. On RNZ, he stuttered and stammered when Corin Dan walked him into a question that he wasn't expecting, because the line of questioning didn't cover the talking points that the crisis comms teams have settled on. That equal pay was fine, it's not going anywhere, that no one is getting a pay cut, and that it's clearly an attack and the fault of Labour. This was, of course, undermined by the fact that it's not equal pay that's the issue, that it's not cutting pay but will be a setback on equitable pay by a decade for some workforces. That National have been in charge of the purse strings for over a year now, coming up on their second budget, and, actors already claiming that this was all about money. And through it all, people are staying focused on the issues. Comment sections under their boy racer posts are full of people calling them out. Comments under mainstream media posts about the media rounds and post-cab conferences are calling them out. The supporters of the change make it worse by posting misogynistic, sexist responses, and the only women who seem keen to support it have pages full of far and alt-right and often conspiracy-fueled content, which for most people undermines the effort the crisis comms team are trying to put into controlling the shitty situation of their own making from a team of dysfunctional politicians who keep showing us exactly who they really are and who they really care about. Hello there, kia ora. Have you heard the phrase, "we had librarians being compared to fishery officers" from an MP lately when talking about the pay equity changes? It's become the go-to argument for the coalition. The Prime Minister used it in response to the protests last week. Nicola Willis mentioned it in her op-ed in the Post in response to being called the C-word by Andrea Vance in an opinion piece that she wrote. Active used it in social media updates. National even had Chris Bishop come along and mansplain the changes on TikTok.
Librarians with fisheries officers, for example.
It's a simple, catchy line, and that's what the coalition are hoping people will see and swallow. And some do, like these people who are spouting similar lines, or going for Misogynist of the Year awards, or, just plain stupid. But like a lot of issues that governments and political parties try to boil down to catchy phrases, it's way more complicated than a single phrase can really show. And with everything else the government can be blamed for right now, from the mass ongoing exodus from the country to the inanity of DEI cuts in the public service, to a measles outbreak, their voters seem to be cheering on because science and evidence are hard, or even failing to meet their target on new cops. Well, they're going to be hoping that people let this issue slide away and a catchy catchphrase will stop people asking actual questions when they point out the most tenuous of arguments to make their point. For example, on the surface, it does seem strange to be comparing librarians with fisheries officers, and for the government to vilify librarians and make them seem like greedy assholes, since librarians and librarian assistants were part of the 33 groups whose claims were cancelled because of this bill, because they are two very different roles. But the issue isn't what the actual job entails, or even the exact qualifications needed. The old Act required detailed research into roles across sectors that had comparable levels of skill and training, not the exact same skills and training. The applicants had to show that male-dominated roles that had similar levels of skill and training were paid more than female-dominated roles. And for librarians, that also included comparisons with property surveyors, teacher aides, customs officers, corrections officers, parking compliance officers, and administration staff. all different roles, all with comparable skill and training levels to some degree. This allowed those bringing the cases to go, look, we do this role, and over here does something very similar. Oh, and we do that role, and something over there also does something very similar. It was never a straight argument of librarians should be paid the same as fishery officers, and the comparison being pushed by the coalition on the topic is disingenuous because they knew this. They voted for it in 2020 when the law was passed. But as you can imagine, when you're looking at lots of comparisons over the minutiae of what a variety of roles entails, this takes time. And when you also have to ensure that you met other criteria in the Act, like the percentage of dominance of women in the workforce and the time women have been dominant in that workforce, that was never going to be a fast process because those going through this process needed to ensure the integrity of the data being presented. And we all saw last week how rushing complicated issues ends up looking like a bad idea and kind of dodgy. But not to worry. The government insists what they have done is simply simplify the process because they believe in equal pay. I mean, remember, they went all out on social media last week to tell us that, and they even believe in equitable pay, as long as it's under the criteria of the new law. Under the new law, claimants will only be able to compare roles in a same or similar field, and there's an issue with that. A lot of low-paid, female-dominated roles in this process are only comparable to other low-paid, female-dominated roles. Nurses, midwives, teachers, plunket admin, librarians. What are the male-dominated roles to which you can compare these two? Which is why the legislation was set up the way it was in the first place, to find the value women in these workforces were being undervalued by. So now there's a higher bar for claimants to work towards again, and a system set up that makes it harder to find how much people in these roles are being undervalued on a case-by-case basis. Because we know as a whole, this number is around $17 billion because that's what's been reallocated in the budget. So that's a pretty good starting point for guessing how much people in those roles are actually being undervalued right now. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along and deal with these guys for the rest of the year. In this week's episode, Brooke Van Velden tries to platform her charisma, uniqueness, nerve and talent. Abusive old man on the tiles says decorum in Parliament is slipping. Scathing reports from the Auditor General and UNESCO about the future for our children. And it's bye to another 70,000 New Zealanders. All that on this week's The News. Hello there, kia ora, I'm Paul, and welcome to this week's The News. It's been a week of bad language flying back and forth in Parliament and media around the use of a C word in an opinion piece by reporter Andrea Vance over the recent changes to pay equity laws passed under urgency last week. Labour leader Chris Hipkins, seen here drinking Conservative tears, has taken responsibility for the question asked in the House that Minister of Workplace Relations Brooke Van Velden used her response to apparently quote the article in the House. While Van Velden, seen here as Lady Demoiselle from Foundation, asked permission to use it in the context of a quote beforehand, the article did not use the actual word, simply implied it, and the article wasn't written by the Labour Party, but Van Velden blamed them for it. Said a spokesperson for the coalition, you're not seeing pay equity in the headlines now, and isn't it nice that we finally recognise that different words in different contexts have different meanings, which we didn't believe when the Deputy Prime Minister got upset at a Green MP's Instagram page. Speaking of pay equity, with Thursday being Budget Day, pay equity is firmly focused in the minds of the public, with a public hui to be held on the grounds of Parliament that day. Supporters of the hui are asking for the bill to be rescinded and expect to descend on Parliament between 1 and 2 p.m. The main goals for the organisers include reversing the changes to the Act, overshadowed by Brooke's deliberate use of a term to cause outrage and distract, reinstate the 33 pay equity claims that they cancelled, and finding a way to finally fund and end pay equity gaps once and for all, said a spokesperson for the three men who run the government that voted for pay rises for themselves this week. I'm sure if women can find time between the dishes and the laundry, they'll be there to support this. Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here looking for the bottle that was meant to be hidden under his desk, has spent the week raging, calling actions in the House recently a degradation of standards. The one coalition MP who will be getting a pay cut this year, Peters went on to say, "I don't use foul language in the House. It brings down the decorum of the institution. And it's totally different to when I said that we should worry about an Asian invasion, that two Wongs don't make a white, that there's no such thing as multiple Pacific Island nations, started harassing trans, queer, and non binary people, supported Trevor Mallard when he punched Tohinade, and used a homophobic term just yesterday when I said Chris Hipkins is a sausage eater who doesn't know a woman is paid less than a man." Te Pāti Māori MPs representing almost 23,000 voters are looking to be suspended from the House for the haka that broke out celebrating the end of the Treaty Principles Bill after the White Privileges Committee recommended the longest ever stand-down period on record of 3 weeks for the party's co-leaders. Under current rules governing Parliament, including an element of tikanga Māori in proceedings must first be given permission to go ahead by someone representing an old white man from a colonial power on the other side of the world. That representative, though, Jerry Brownlee, seen here showing you a shortcut through the airport, has warned MPs that he feels this punishment is disproportionate, being 7 times the length of the longest previous ban, and has said on Tuesday he will authorise open debate on the topic, meaning opposition MPs could use the event to filibuster and eventually delay the budget. The ACT Party, seen here trudging through the House with cow shit covered gumboots, said it was about respecting the sanctity of Parliament, while the Prime Minister said of the situation, "It's not like we put anything in the budget for those 23,000 voters anyway, so does it matter if they've got representation here or not?" The Green Party this week released its alternative budget with a focus on evolving the economy to shift to a greener, fairer economy that looks after all its citizens, with promises of free doctors and dental care and the creation of a new public works department with a focus on the green sector. Economists have noted that this would keep debt levels within the Reserve Bank safety zone, which sees it as acceptable, with some saying it's very forward-thinking. The Prime Minister, seen here cosplaying as Ernst Stavros Blofeld, however, has taken umbrage at the inclusion of a jet tax, saying, "What I'm saying to you is, I used to run an airline," while Winston Peters, seen here trying his hand at prop comedy, called it Marxism with a printout for emphasis, saying, "My voters have no idea what Marxism really is, but think it's bad. So I'm calling it that to scare the gullible voters out there. And if people don't stop supporting the left, I'm going to be forced to call it communism, or even woke." While David Seymour, seen here with his own party's version of Donald Trump's friend Jeffrey Epstein, called it left-wing Trumpism after research found that politicians who push Trumpist ideologies keep losing at elections, and he didn't want to be tarred with that brush. The Auditor General has released a scathing report into Oranga Tamariki and its procedural changes put in place last year to slash budgets and pay for tax cuts and tobacco company kickbacks, because the changes did not consider the impact on children, which the Auditor General says is unacceptable since, that's the core function of the organisation. The changes were put in place in a rushed manner at the insistence of Children's Minister Karen Chow, seen here spotting a child succeeding, who said, "Yeah, those changes were forced last year, so it's all Labour's fault." Stats New Zealand's latest price tracking data has shown that food prices rose 3.7% annually last month, driven primarily by the costs of butter and dairy products, but seen across all 5 food groups that they monitor. Said the Prime Minister, seen here being forced to spend time with a poor person, "What I'm saying to you is we obviously have a laser focus on the cost of living in mansions paid for by your multiple rental incomes." In another report, Statistics New Zealand says Aotearoa New Zealand has seen its smallest net migration gain in more than 2 years, pointing out the flow of new migrants into the country has slowed, while a record 70,000 Kiwis left in the year to March, 2/3 of which went to Australia. Of those leaving, the majority were between 18 and 30 years old. ASB senior economist Mark Smith says this pattern reflects the weakening position of the New Zealand economy, while the Minister of Immigration, Erica Stanford, says, "Look, I'm glad they're going. It gives me more time to sort out my email and printer issues if there's less people migrating for me to worry about." Associate Education Minister and Snapchatter of 14-year-olds David Seymour has made a pre-budget announcement of $140 million for truancy services. Said the minister, seen here with someone who knows that school avoidance can be exacerbated by young people dealing with a range of outside issues that cause them harm. "Yes, We're cutting funding to truancy services, rolled back roles in the field last year, and even asked mayors to take over the role, which obviously is one of those core purposes of local government. So this is all their fault that we have to spend money on children and not tobacco companies. Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here showing why he needs a car booster seat, has been caught out sending out a heavily redacted memo that Health New Zealand then released with no redactions that showed the minister is not only aware of the issues to the workforce and the health system by rushing surgeries through private hospitals, which would lead to further degradation of the public health system, he seems to be actively encouraging it. Said the minister, I don't see a problem here. I'll be sorted if we make everything private. It's been discovered by local democracy reporters that the government will be removing funding for 113 kaiawhina, or support staff, dedicated for one-to-one patient care in our hospitals and medical facilities in support around the country in this year's upcoming budget. Said Nicola Willis, Finance Minister, we know we promised budget cuts wouldn't impact frontline services, but these have a Māori name, so they don't count. A new report from accounting and business advisory firm Baker Tilly has found that despite tax cuts in last year's budget, New Zealanders are now paying an average of 4.66% more tax than they did a year ago. The drivers for this include increased prices on essentials like food, power, and car registration, with every price increase seeing an incremental increase in GST take, as well as an increased costs for rates that have jumped 11% in the last 12 months as councils grapple with increased costs and ongoing issues, like water infrastructure and the tail end of high inflation, said finance spokesperson Nicola Willis. See, laser focus. An external review initiated by ACT MP Nicole McKee, seen here realising that the public don't want gun access to be too easy, into the safety outcomes of the firearms registry started in the wake of the Christchurch terror attack, has found that the registry is doing exactly as it was intended and is working as expected. A spokesperson for the police said that the registry was 2 years into a 5-year plan and it was already delivering results on keeping guns off streets and keeping people safe, even if the minister herself hasn't registered on it yet. In response, Nicole McKee claimed that the report was wrong, that experts clearly don't know what they're talking about, and that we won't be properly safe from gun violence until every child has a handgun under their pillow and their parents have several questionable firearms buried in their backyard. The government has admitted that they got it wrong. Sorry, only on one thing, not on everything that they've clearly got wrong. They've admitted that the Family Start system, which requires manual entry and has only been fully reimbursed to 259 families since it started, has used a quarter of its funding on administration costs and have said that this was due to errors on their behalf. Said Nicola Willis, seen here daydreaming about the upset public servants losing their jobs to pay for her tax cuts, it's very expensive to rush things instead of waiting to build an automated integrated system that would have done this with precision and reduced admin costs. But no matter how many times people told me that, well, I clearly didn't listen to them because they're poor. A week after law changes pushed through under urgency, making it easier to kill native animals like the kiwi, the Department of Conservation has announced another 68 roles are to be removed to reach the government's goals of tax cuts for landlords, meaning that one guy named Barry living in a central Otago hut will now be the entire Department of Conservation workforce. New research into the drug habits of New Zealanders has found that online shopping is the way of the future. The New Zealand Drug Survey undertakes annual research into trends of drug usage and distribution and has found that the online sales have been increasing, especially through social media. It's increased between 100 and 250% in the past 5 years. Said Police Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here teaching new cops the importance of always blowing on the pie. Naturally, we're very concerned about this and we'll do everything we can to reduce the harm caused by these substances. Except properly funding customs, making pseudoephedrine illegal, legalising and regulating marijuana like we do with tobacco, properly fund addiction services and community outreach programs will deal with the drivers of poverty, which are seen as drivers for drug use. Because that's what we mean by being tough on crime. A new report from UNICEF has ranked New Zealand 32nd out of 36 wealthy countries in global youth well-being markers. The report found that the country has the highest youth suicide rates of any of the 36 measured, 3 times the average rate, with Māori, rainbow and disabled youth experiencing disproportionately high rates of attempted suicide and bullying still remaining widespread. Social Development Minister Louise Upston, seen here being told stuff framed this article to make it look like she wanted to harm more kids, has called the numbers disappointing and said we must do better to improve the lives of young Kiwis. And having a government that vilifies Māori, considers disabled people a burden, and openly encourages anti-rainbow rhetoric is the only way to do that because, that's how we fix the economy. And finally, Tauranga Mayor Mahi Drysdale, seen here wondering where he is today, has finally purchased a home in the place that he is mayor of, having purchased a property in Papamoa, with plans to move his whānau over from Cambridge at the end of the school year to avoid disruption in their education. It's not uncommon for local body elected members to live outside the areas that they represent, but Drysdale was one of the furthest away from the place he was elected to, second only to Hamilton City Council's Andrew Bidder and Southland District Council's Jaspreet Boparai, who live on another planet and are completely detached from our reality. Right, that's this week's The News. Live long, prosper, look after yourself, and we will catch you guys all next week. Wow, this is not a good place for putting a stand. It's all very shaky, but thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. Really appreciate you making it this far through. Don't forget, as I said before, hit that like button if you can, want to, if you liked it. I don't know why anybody would like the content, to be honest. It's horrifying, half the shit that we have to talk through in this. Anyway, I'm going to go and grab my cup of tea and sit down and edit this all together while I try and stay awake during interview with Jan, which is, I'm sure, going to be absolutely fiery because she has been on point with all of this at the moment. But I'm just, as I said, really tired at the beginning of this whole omnibus thing. Anyway, I'll leave you to it. Live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I'll catch you guys all next time. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.